The summer 2019 anime season was a great season for anime. We had shows ranging from varying qualities. There were a lot of hidden gems this season, but also a lot of not. Shows that had great potential that didn't quite live up to those potential, and shows that had no right being as good as they were. And in this video, I will be discussing the show that, in my opinion, truly deserves the title of anime of the season. The show that was consistently the best show week after week after week this season. The show that you most likely already know because I named it at the title of this video, so there's really no point in me trying to drag this out to build suspense and hype other than to pad the runtime and to make it look more professional. Vinland Saga. I'm talking about Vinland Saga. Duh. Okay, so now that Vinland Saga is definitely anime of the season. Sadly, not even the brilliance of iShield 21 writer Riichiro Inagaki alongside artist Boichi with their phenomenal creation Dr. Stone could triumph against Vinland Saga and its author Yukimura Makoto. In my opinion, Vinland Saga just blows it out of the water. Not to take anything away from Dr. Stone, it's still a great series, second only to Vinland Saga this season, at least in my opinion. You should still definitely check it out if you haven't already. It's a really clever show and has characters that are Riichiro Inagaki guaranteed. Meaning, they're really, really, really likable. But enough of that, let's get to Vinland Saga, shall we? Okay, first of all, I just want to clarify. I am way out of my element here. As I stated in my case for the best summer 2019 video, I do not watch a lot of historical shows. It's not my genre, so I'm sorry now if at any point in the video I sound a bit basic in my breakdown or if I marvel too much at certain things within the show that is already commonplace within the genre. I'm just not going to be too familiar with them, so bear with me here a bit. With all that said, a good story is still a good story, no matter what type or genre it is. So let's do this. Oh, and I feel like I don't really have to say this anymore as it's already pretty obvious, but spoilers ahead if you haven't seen the show. There, I warned you, don't say I didn't. Okay, so for those who haven't seen the show, this is a basic synopsis of the series. Thors, a member of the Vikings, basically a group of really badass and powerful Vikings, decided one day, you know what? Violence is actually not that good. So he decides to leave the Vikings and live out a new life with his wife Helga and his two children Ylva and Thorfinn in a small village in Iceland. And they lived there pretty peacefully for years, until this guy who looks like he came straight out of Minecraft, Floki, came and basically said, you know what? F your peaceful life. It's wartime, baby. Wartime. So, you know, without having any choice, Thors reluctantly picked a handful of the village's top-notch warriors, which are none by the way, and set out to war. During this time, we find out that Minecraft guy actually had something devious up his sleeve. He decides to hire Askeladd and his pirate crew to kill Thors while on their way to the war. Essentially, box-stabbing Thors. Get it? Cause his face is a box and, you know, instead of back, it's box, like his face and... You get it. You get it. You get it. Long story short, Thors and a few men from the village set out to sail, with Thorfinn secretly sneaking on board. They come across Askeladd and his crew, and after a brilliant display of Thors' strength and manliness, he is killed in order to save his son and everyone else from the village. I'm not crying, you're crying. And Thorfinn decides to not go home and thick with Askeladd in the hopes of one day actually killing him and getting revenge for his father. And from there we just follow Thorfinn and his journey in this world engulfed in violence and chaos and slavery and all sorts of bad things. That's basically the most basic synopsis I can give you about the story of this show. I don't know. Now, if there's one thing that I love experiencing while watching Vinland Saga, it's being wrong almost all the time. I know, weird. What I mean by this is that the show is so refreshing because of the fact that it questions my ability to read and predict storylines almost all the time. Because I'm almost always completely wrong with how I think certain events are gonna unfold. For example, I thought Thorfinn was going to develop a somewhat twisted kinship with Askeladd and his crew. Like, I don't expect him to be buddy-buddies with them, considering they killed his father. That's something not even years of therapy can fix. Not that I would know or anything. But I mean, like, you know, a type of relationship where they kind of respect and acknowledge what he brings to the table. But, no. They don't really give a flying rat's ass about him at all. The only people that even remotely acknowledges his presence and, somewhat values it, quotation marks, is Askeladd and Bjorn. Which, is really not ideal since Askeladd basically just uses Thorfinn, and Bjorn, I would say, feels guilty and maybe a bit ashamed for essentially killing Thorfinn's father in the unsightly manner that he did, unbecoming of the warrior that he was. NANI? I mean, at least I think so. I might be wrong with that, but whatever, it's not the point. But I enjoyed that aspect of the show, that very unpredictable and unique way of storytelling that really deviates from tropes and cliches that are so easy to fall back to when you're writing a story. I'm not saying that cliche automatically means bad, but seeing a work that really avoids that and tries to be as unique as it can possibly be really makes me appreciate the series even more. It makes Vinland Saga unpredictable and infinitely more interesting. And in a weird way, I feel somewhat bliss whenever the story takes a sharp turn from what I think will happen. It's always great when a show is able to surprise you like that. I don't know if this is just for Vinland Saga or if every show in the genre is like this, but I really do admire that about this show nonetheless. And after doing a bit of research, just a bit, I found out that Vinland Saga is actually just loosely inspired on stories about myths and Vikings from the 11th century, meaning the mangaka basically crafted everything in the story of his own accord, so it's not really the most historically accurate show out there, and the author does take liberties from its inspiration when writing the series. So, you know, take that in mind, I guess. What's also interesting is that the episodes themselves feel very episodic in nature. They tend to neatly wrap up the events of each episode within just that episode and rarely actually spills into the next. But at the same time, it also leads and contributes to the larger narrative of the show, which to me really complements the show's slow pace and steady build-up of the world and its story. And that's the thing that really excites me about the show as well. The world feels very massive, and I'm excited to follow Thorfinn and his journey, to see more of this incredible yet cruel world they've been slowly building up. To see the payoff of them setting up the Vinland Saga quest, or at least Vinland Saga itself, to be a symbol of freedom in a world otherwise devoid of it. To learn more and to witness the people and the cultures that inhabit it, and to see their struggles and the cruel circumstances they have to deal with. I love seeing all these elements play out as I watch the show. If you enjoy watching great action, then this show is definitely for you. In my opinion, it has the best action set pieces among all the other shows this season. Yes, all of them. And the reason why is because it approaches these action set pieces in two fronts. Brilliantly thought out fights and amazingly animated visuals that fully incorporate everything at their disposal to deliver dynamic and visually stimulating action. It's really impressive to see this level of quality for essentially a weekly television show. But considering this is Wit Studios, I'm actually not that surprised. Almost every instance of a meaningful fight within the show gets this level of treatment. From Thor's fight with Askeladd all the way to Thorfinn's bout with Thor Article and Episode 9, all of them showing the same consistent level of quality in both fronts. I love shows that really incorporate strategies and in-fight scheming when it comes to fights. I love seeing the back and forth between each party's strategies and getting inside their thought process and understanding how they think and how they make their decisions. How one party is going to counter the other and how the other is going to adapt to the ever-changing scenarios he or she has to deal with. I love seeing the progression of a fight, how a fight unfolds and the various ups and downs within them, how one side takes control of the tide and how the other reacts to it. To me, good fights are like chemical reactions. Two different and opposing sides constantly adapting to one another's moves until one side eventually triumphs over the other, creating an interesting and intense experience/product for the audience watching. Yeah, the metaphor kind of falls apart when I think about it. It doesn't really make any sense. But whatever, that's not the point, okay? The point is, I love those types of fights. The fights that really, makes you use your head, more so than necessarily just brute force. And that's why some of my favorite fights in anime are JoJo fights, because you get to experience all of these things that I just mentioned within them. And Vinland Saga also showcases these qualities. For example, the most important and impactful fight to me in the series so far is the fight between Thors and Askeladd. It does a great job of showcasing the progression of the fight and how Askeladd thinks and his strategies within the fight, as well as how Thors counteracts those strategies and eventually how he wins against them. Thors doesn't just overpower Askeladd, even though physically speaking, he could probably manhandle Askeladd. And Askeladd as well uses his wit and strategizing to kind of even out the playing field. It's just that in this particular case, Thors was able to outsmart and out-strategize Askeladd using a combination of his wit and physical prowess. And every other somewhat meaningful fight in the series gets this level of thought and care put behind it. In the duel between Askeladd and Thorfinn, I remember vividly the moment Thorfinn swung his dagger at the hilt of Askeladd's sword to make him lose his grip on it after just using another swing as a distraction for it. It's one of the many memorable moments this series has. But that's just the first front. The second front is the amazing visuals done by Wit Studios. The consistency this anime has had throughout the entirety of its run is astounding. From day one, the visuals have been through the roof, with stellar and dynamic looking and feeling visuals, all thanks to this one thing that this anime incorporates a lot in the series: 360-degree camera movements. Look at this shot right here. Look at how the camera just zooms past otherwise impossible angles. In my opinion, this right here is the sole reason for this show's dynamic feeling and looking visuals. There's no other show this season that incorporates this many 360-degree camera movements. It's pretty much a staple of Vinland Saga. It really adds more impact to an otherwise already beautifully animated sequence. In these two fronts, the well thought out and strategy heavy approach, alongside the 360-degree camera movement reliant visuals, that makes Vinland Saga's action the best this season. The final point I want to discuss in this video is about Askeladd and Thorfinn's characters. Why I think they work so well and the nuances to each of their characters. Let's start with Thorfinn. Before I say anything else, take a shower, dude! I know you're out to seek vengeance and all, but that doesn't mean you're not allowed to wet yourself every now and again. Anyway, Thorfinn is one of those vengeance-driven protagonists. We've probably seen one or two of these in anime before. But the thing that makes Thorfinn such a unique character, despite having significant parallels with other vengeance-driven protagonists, is something so obvious, but at the same time, something very effective. He is alone. I mean, not literally, since he's with Askeladd and his crew, but what I mean is that there's nobody there to support him, to steer him to the right path, to help him with his grief. Nobody is there for him. No one cares if he starves to death. No one cares if he dies in battle. Thorfinn has nobody. Unlike, say, Eren from Attack on Titan. Yeah, his hatred and thirst for vengeance is there. It's palpable, sure, but he also has Armin and Mikasa there to support him. They're there to ground him, to keep him from just completely destroying himself because of his hate. Plus, there's also all the other characters he meets along the way, like the 104th and the Survey Corps. They are there to give him something to care about, something to fight for, and to not just be consumed by his hatred. But Thorfinn doesn't have that. Even when there were people that did care for him, the family back in episode 6, he still pushed them away, he still hurt them, granted not willingly, but still. And this just gives his quest for vengeance even more weight and impact. The contrast between his life before Thor's death and after just perfectly complements the tragedy of it all. Back home, he was surrounded by people that did care for him. His mom, his sister, the people at the village. But because of his quest for vengeance, his hatred for Askeladd, he gave up that life for this new, lonely, and tragic one. In a way, he's pretty much the reason why he is suffering right now. Because he's the one who decided to throw away everything for the sake of vengeance. Yes, Thor's dying wasn't his fault, but nobody forced him to stay on that boat, especially since everyone except Thor's was able to come back home safely. He chose to stay, and that speaks volumes on how much vengeance and hatred can destroy a person. Think about it. He didn't even try and go back home after all these years. Nobody, not even Askeladd, was forcing him to stay among that group. But because he was consumed by hate and vengeance, he willingly chose to stay until he could have the chance to exact his revenge against Askeladd for killing his father. In episode 10, this is pretty much validated when he had that dream sequence. Thorfinn's vengeance is the only thing that pushes him forward, and there is absolutely nothing else. For now in the story at least. That's what makes his story so tragic. Now let's talk about Askeladd. In my opinion, he's the most interesting character in the show because he himself is the perfect representation for it. A character that looks and feels like one thing but is completely different from it. Askeladd is the leader of a notorious, village-pillaging and brutalist pirate crew, and you would think as the leader of that crew he would be the same thing. A character that only cares about himself and his greed. But Askeladd is so much more than that. Yes, a lot of the things he does is for money. Yes, he's incredibly ruthless and will kill anybody without any remorse. Even his fighting style largely depends on him tricking and taking advantage of his opponent. He's not above using dirty tricks as long as he wins. That's all a fact. And just based on that, Askeladd should be just another greedy and scummy character. Yet he's still so likable and a treat to watch. His ingenious and unorthodox way of thinking and solving problems always makes the show more exciting. But why? I think a large part of why that is the case, why he's so likable, is because the show does a great job of showing us the two sides of Askeladd. The warrior side that is excited about fighting worthy opponents, and the pirate leader side that is supposed to be tough and brutal and will do anything to get what he wants. And these traits of him was perfectly shown in his fight against Thors. The moment in that episode where he asked Thors to become the leader of his crew was genuine and real. He meant that entirely. He had seen in Thor someone that he truly respects enough to want to follow, but because he was already the leader of his own pirate crew, he just couldn't let that side of him show. He couldn't show any signs of weakness or inferiority, and thus he had to unwillingly swallow his words and go against his own philosophy and beliefs. He didn't want to kill Thors in the manner that he did, but he had to keep up appearances. To me, that's what makes him so interesting. The contradicting duality of his character. He prides himself as a mighty warrior that fights for glory and honor and relishes in the idea of fighting a worthy opponent. But he is also the leader of a scummy, greedy, and honorless pirate crew that will do anything and everything for their own personal greed. It's beautiful. It truly is beautiful. And seeing the way the show defines Askeladd and Thorfinn's dynamic through both of their characterizations adds to the show more. Notice that Askeladd keeps Thorfinn around even after knowing the fact that he wants to kill him because he's useful. He's using him. That's the pirate side of him taking advantage of Thorfinn. But the warrior side is kind of hoping that Thorfinn can become a truly worthy opponent, so he puts him in these dangerous situations to kind of help him get stronger so that he can one day face a truly worthy opponent in Thorfinn. I'm not saying he's secretly looking out for Thorfinn. He does show a bit of a soft spot for him, maybe out of respect for his father, but for the most part he's doing this for his own gain. If Thorfinn is able to succeed, then Askeladd gets what he wants, a Thorfinn that is closer to being a worthy opponent. But if he doesn't succeed and dies from it, then Askeladd basically loses nothing. And Thorfinn lets himself be used because that's literally the only thing that is driving him forward. He has nothing else but his vengeance. It's kind of a perfectly constructed relationship for them, in a weirdly sociopathic and twisted way.
忘れるなよアシュラット
And that's pretty much all I want to talk about in this video. There are still many things that I haven't discussed about the show that showcases its greatness, but there's really no reason for me to discuss that anymore in this video. You should just go and watch the show and find those things out for yourselves. This show is definitely a classic in the making. I'm calling it now. It's a brilliantly paced, beautifully animated, and masterfully written character drama that everyone should watch. Regardless if you're like me and isn't that into the genre. It's still an amazing show. It definitely deserves the title of Anime of the Season for the summer 2019 anime season. This was Aaronoticz, blasting off. Peace.